In this tutorial, we will look into embedding Java code into JSP and also why that's generally not a good idea. First, we'll learn how to use implicit variables in our JSP. Then we will translate our Hello World servlet examples into JSP. We will debug and step into these example JSPs. And finally, we will learn why using embedded Java in a JSP is a bad idea. Now we are going to go back to our course documentation and look at our embedding Java into JSP section. The first thing we'll look at is implicit objects and their use. So here is a link to the official documentation on implicit objects. Back in Eclipse, and we'll run our archetype. We look at the Hello World form, and then we go back to Eclipse. We open the launch configuration of our Tomcat server. We look at arguments and the Catalina base directory. And in the Catalina base directory, we look at the translated index.jsp Java file. And in our generated JSP service method, we see the definition of the implicit objects, and we see how the implicit objects are being used to output the JSP. Now back to our course documentation and looking at the next step where we are debugging the greeting.jsp file, which is a JSP version of the Hello World servlet file. Back in Eclipse, this is our greeting.jsp, and we added a line breakpoint at the hello user line 16. So let's run our app. Actually, let's debug our app. We hit our first breakpoint on our index.jsp. And this is a link to the Hello World servlet, but we are going to go to the greeting.jsp. And we see we hit our breakpoint at hello user. We can step over our breakpoint and we can resume. Now this is the presentation of our greeting.jsp. Once we submit, we hit our breakpoint again. So step over and resume. And we see the functionality has been executed. In Eclipse, we highlight our embedded Java sections. Now back to our course documentation. And next up, we will look at a checkboxes form that will submit to a checkboxes submit.jsp. And what we are doing here is essentially duplicating the multi-value parameter servlet functionality in JSP. And as you can see, there is plenty of embedded Java sections. And we will debug and step through this JSP logic. Now back in Eclipse, this is our checkboxes JSP form action, and we post to the checkboxes submit JSP. And when we look at the checkboxes submit JSP, we see we get an array of the colors, and we either display you did not select any colors, or we output all the selected colors. Let's debug this. We hit our index breakpoint and we select our checkboxes JSP, and let's select two colors. and submit, and we get the display of the colors. And obviously we haven't hit any breakpoints because we don't have any. We'll add one and another one. We'll go back to our input form. And now that we've added the breakpoint, we actually hit it. We can step over. We can look at our properties and resume. And we see we come in for our second for loop. And there we have it. We are past all the for loops. And we display our selection. Now back to our course documentation. And next up, we'll look at the implicit application variable that we can use for embedded Java. And we'll look at a new JSP page, context parameters.jsp, in which we display our context parameters that we set up within our web.xml config file. Now here in Eclipse, this is our new context parameters.jsp file, and all we do is we display the application parameters. We have to define them in our web.xml, so we will add them here. And now we are ready to look at our context parameters.jsp page. So we'll run it. And here we see our context parameters.jsp display with our user-defined settings in the web XML displaying through the application variable. Now that concludes our review of embedded Java and code. And back in our course documentation, we look at why it is not a good idea to actually do that. The main reason is you break the model view controller pattern of the modern Java enterprise applications, and it causes you to have odd dependencies on your JSP and embedded Java that you will need to update and fix for every change. That's also the reason why generally in the Java Enterprise Edition, we have moved on to the Java Server Faces, which is an extension of the MVC pattern using the existing JSP technology. And then, of course, we also have the flavor of the month Java script framework, and that seems to change every few months. And that concludes this tutorial. I will see you in the next one.